Imagine waking up one morning and finding out your neighbors have not only stopped talking to you, but also shut their borders, cut off trade and airspace, effectively pretending you don't exist. No, this isn't a hypothetical situation. This was Qatar's reality in 2017. A tiny country, heavily dependent on its neighbors for food, flights, and trade, suddenly found itself completely isolated. And yet, instead of collapsing, Qatar pulled off one of the most impressive national comebacks in modern history. It reinvented itself, strengthened its economy, and became even more influential on the world stage. Today, we are breaking down what Canada, yes, the peaceful, maple syrup loving, hockey cheering giant, can learn from Qatar's resilience, strategy, and gas powered rise. Quick backstory. What actually happened to Qatar in 2017? Overnight, Qatar's neighbors, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and Egypt, announced a blockade. They cut diplomatic ties, stopped exports, shut down borders, denied airspace, and halted shipping. For Qatar, this was huge. Most of its food came through those neighbors. Construction materials came through them. A lot of its flights crossed their skies. Imagine if Canada suddenly couldn't access any U.S. border crossings or airspace. That's the scale we're talking about. The expectation was simple. Qatar would panic. But instead, Qatar activated a survival plan that was fast, creative, and honestly, impressive enough to deserve its own Netflix series. How Qatar turned a crisis into growth. Within days, Qatar rerouted trade through Turkey, Oman, and Iran. Cargo ships that once went through Saudi ports were now taking brand new routes created almost overnight. Instead of complaining, Qatar went, "Fine, we'll make new friends." One of the wildest stories from that time is about milk. Qatar imported most of its dairy from Saudi Arabia. When the border closed, the shelves went empty. The solution? Qatar literally flew in thousands of cows by airplane. Yep, passenger planes turned into flying farms. Within months, Qatar was producing its own milk locally, something that seemed impossible before the blockade. At the same time, Qatar doubled down on its biggest strength, natural gas. Rather than slowing down during the crisis, it expanded production, signed long-term energy contracts with Asian and European countries, and positioned itself as an indispensable global supplier. The world needed Qatar's gas more than Qatar needed the approval of its neighbors. Qatar also invested aggressively in infrastructure. Ports were expanded, shipping capacity increased, and industrial zones grew. What started as a response to survival ended up making the country nearly blockade-proof. And while some countries tried to isolate Qatar, the rest of the world did the opposite. The US barring the initial hiccups, Europe, Turkey, India, Iran, and Japan strengthened ties. In the end, the blockade didn't isolate Qatar, it expanded its global network. What Canada can learn from all this? Now let's talk about Canada. It may not be facing a blockade, but the world is becoming more uncertain, more competitive, and more unpredictable, especially after the US imposed tariffs and 51st state rhetoric. Qatar's experience offers lessons Canada can use to protect its economy and strengthen its global position. One major lesson is the danger of depending too heavily on a single trade partner. Qatar learned this instantly when its main trading neighbors all cut ties. Canada also depends heavily on one major partner, the United States. The US-Canada partnership has historically been strong, but with tensions rising lately, Canada now faces greater exposure in an increasingly unpredictable world. Qatar's approach shows the importance of expanding relationships in Asia, Africa, and Europe so that the country always has options. Another lesson comes from how Qatar used natural gas as a strategic tool. Qatar's gas exports are not just an economic asset. They're a form of geopolitical power. Countries rely on Qatari gas for energy security. That dependence gives Qatar influence and stability on the world stage. Canada also has massive gas reserves but has struggled to fully capitalize on them because of slow project approvals, long environmental assessments, and political debates. Qatar moved fast. Canada often advances cautiously, and sometimes a bit too slowly. The lesson here is that if Canada wants to play a bigger role in global energy, it needs to speed up LNG infrastructure, sign long-term supply contracts, and position itself as a reliable energy partner to Europe and Asia. Qatar's crisis also forced it to become more self-sufficient. It built industries it never thought it needed, like dairy farming, food processing, and domestic manufacturing. Some might think Canada's massive size means it can produce everything it needs, but it still depends on imports for many basic goods. Strengthening local production, improving food security, and building stronger domestic supply chains would help Canada become more resilient during global disruptions. Infrastructure is another area where Qatar moved boldly. Its ports, shipping networks, and industrial areas improved rapidly during the blockade. Canada, on the other hand, often faces delays, bottlenecks, and aging systems. Faster approvals, more modern ports, better rail networks, and improved Arctic infrastructure would help Canada compete in a world where speed matters. Finally, Qatar's diplomatic strategy shows the importance of having many global partners rather than relying on a few. Qatar turned isolation into an opportunity to build new friendships. Canada already has a great international reputation, but expanding partnerships beyond traditional allies can create new trade, energy, and political opportunities. Qatar's story is one of resilience. It faced a crisis that could have crushed its economy and instead came out stronger, more independent, and more globally influential than before. For Canada, another resource-rich nation with global ambitions, Qatar's experience offers a roadmap for how to build strength in uncertain times. Diversify trade, use natural resources strategically, invest in resilience, move faster on infrastructure, and build a wider network of global partners. The real point isn't that Qatar and Canada are the same. They're completely different in size, geography, and political structure. But Qatar's experience proves that when a country faces pressure, it can either retreat or reinvent itself. Qatar chose reinvention, and the result was a stronger, more diversified, and more respected nation. Canada has the resources, the talent, and the global reputation to thrive in a changing world. What it needs now is sharper focus, faster execution, and a willingness to adapt. If Canada embraces those qualities, it can shape not just its own future, but play a larger role on the world stage. The potential is already there. It just needs to be unlocked. If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Can Canada take lessons from other countries as well? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.